So good afternoon, and welcome to our presentation, how atmail picked OpenStack for its email as a service products. I'm kind of glad I got that out without my tongue being twisted.
Yeah.
So my name is Matt Bryant. I'm a senior DevOps engineer at atmail, and co-presenting today is Jonathan LeCour, senior VP of Product and Technology at DreamHost, who very kindly runs our OpenStack for us.
Yeah,
that we use for our
behave from taking you down.
Our OpenStack Cloud, or their OpenStack Cloud, our product. So I thought we'd kick off today with just a brief overview of what we planned for this presentation. Starting off with a little bit about atmail. I'm sure there's a few people out there that are wondering who the heck we are, what do we do, where we came from. Move on to the various of whys. Why change? Why OpenStack? Why DreamHost? Cover our journey so far, both from an atmail perspective and a DreamHost perspective. What was our initial aim? What did we find? What did we learn? What did we discover? Touch base on the future, what we see in the future and what interests us from the OpenStack world. And have some time at the end for some Q&A. So that's what we plan to cover. So I guess, oops, a bit too fast. Who is atmail? And where did we come from? Well, we began in 1998. We were founded by Ben Duncan and basically produced one of the first commercial webmail applications.
Important note, where were you founded and where is the business located?
We're headquartered in Bridgeon Beach, but it wasn't not quite there to start with.
Fair enough. Still, it's an Aussie company.
Yeah, so we're headquartered in Bridgeon Beach on the Sunshine Coast in sunny Queensland. So that was 1998. And I suppose for the next 14 years, selling that software was our market. The product went through various upgrades, obviously, and feature changes, and as usual with software. But mainly it was sold as a webmail-only front end for likes of hosting providers and ISPs, telcos, people that ran their mail infrastructure already and just wanted a bolt-on webmail front end. And a mail server full stack, mail server out of a box, basically, more aimed at the SMB market. It wasn't until about 2012 where there was kind of a shift in the marketplace, where you started seeing vendors start offering their own kind of software and as a service. Forget the hassle of running your own server and infrastructure. Come join us, we'll manage it for you. So in 2012, as I said, atmail responded to that shift by starting its own hosted service. And that gradually morphed over the next year into what is currently the atmail cloud. And today, that service has seen, or rather enjoyed, a 99.999% uptime and a 99% customer satisfaction. So, and I should put another year on that, which is 2017, where we started up our EU cloud. So we were pretty cool with that. So overall, in terms of cloud and on-premise and all over the world where we are, we power around 40 million mailboxes. So that's pretty good. So what caused us to change? What was the drivers behind it? Hardware was one driver, and I'm sure there's probably a few out there that have been in similar circumstances. Aging hardware in a couple of data centers. What were we going to do? We were going to replace it, upgrade it. Something needed to be done with it. On the other hand, we also rented some bare metals from other hosting providers, and they, for a period of time, kind of enjoyed a rather bad luck spate of RAID degradation. And frequently enough, I suppose, to a point where we kind of said, well, can we get out of the hardware game entirely? So that's what we were looking at. Cost, obviously, was another driver. What company doesn't have cost as a driver these days? Everybody's after trying to do more with less to a degree, while still maintaining their levels, or service levels of their stuff. So, and cost goes back to the hardware question again, because obviously, when you run hardware, you have to spec that hardware for its lifetime. So you could end up potentially with a whole bunch of hardware underutilized, or maybe probably on the other hand, trying to scramble around for hardware to get a platform that's kind of under strain back into control. Which kind of leads us to the one of the last drivers, and that was increased flexibility. We wanted to be able to scale quickly and respond to the pace we were growing at, and that's kind of what the cloud seemed to be offering. Well, it was offering. not seem to be offering. So we looked out there, and because we'd kind of made a decision, yes, okay, let's look out there, see what's out there in terms of infrastructure as a platform, or platform as a service, or whatever you want to call it these days. And it kind of led on to the next question, which was, okay, which cloud? There was a few out there. Obviously, there was the biggies of AWS and Microsoft Azure, trying to take a chunk out of them. We looked around various hosting providers. They were mostly based around VMware technology. And last but not least, there was this little project called OpenStack. Well, okay, not so little. It was an open source project, which was very interesting to us. Atmail is a very keen open source user. Our founder was a keen open source advocate. And if we can basically do anything within open source, that's the path we would have our preference. It was certainly a project that was seeing a huge interest peak. I know it came out of nowhere. So our open source project sounds good to us. Can it do what we want it to do? Which was the obvious question. Which led to another question, because we obviously didn't want to run it. So who could we partner with to do that for us? Because we obviously wanted to get out of that game. So this is where DreamHost came in for us.
Right. Well, thanks. Yeah, it's really funny. DreamHost and Atmail have quite a similar history, and I think that's going to play a lot into why we're good partners for each other. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about our background. So Atmail was founded in 1998. We were founded in 1997. Employee-owned, never taken a dollar from anyone out there. Mostly WordPress hosting, managed hosting, web presence, and we have a series of cloud services built in open source software. Notably on Ceph, which is a project we created and incubated at DreamHost, and we are the longest running operators of Ceph in the world, and have one of the largest clusters out there for the object storage Rados gateway. And we also have Dream Compute, which is our OpenStack public cloud. And we have over 400,000 customers, 1.5 million domain names under management, about 200 employees, 3 offices, and 2 primary data centers in the United States, 1 on each coast. I put some information up there about kind of what drives us and who we are, to kind of drive home the point that culture and values ended up playing big into why we're compatible partners. So when we met, I actually met Ben Duncan, the founder of Atmail, at a conference in OSCON way back, 5 or 6 years ago at this point. And we started talking about our kind of shared passion for open source. We talked a lot about Ceph, actually, at the time. He was keen on using Ceph, potentially. And we just began the relationship then. So, that's when we, finally decided, okay, you guys are trying to make a move, get out of the hardware game. That's our bread and butter. Let's talk.
Yeah, which leads us nicely to the next slide, because obviously DreamHost were the infrastructure kind of experts for us. We were the email on top of that, which seemed like a good combination. Both into open source, as Jonathan said, and they offered, I suppose, what very few companies could offer, and that is very, very extremely close collaboration. We didn't just have access to the help desk. We had access to the engineers and the admins behind the scenes that actually built and ran the platform. And for us, that was a huge, being complete cloud novices was a huge bonus for us.
Yeah, I think that's a point to me that I think is particularly interesting. OpenStack offers an opportunity for service providers, especially service providers who may not be giants, right? I mean, we're a large, successful hosting company, but we can compete and find customers who would be otherwise underserved by the likes of Amazon and Google and Microsoft, because, frankly, they're just not quite big enough, right? But for us, they're, a company that is very similar to us in values, and they have a problem that we can help solve. So I think it really is. I've noticed a lot of the public cloud providers in OpenStack now are regional. They're serving very specific subsets or use cases in particular markets that Amazon probably doesn't really care about that much. So this is a good example of why I think that has a long-term kind of future for OpenStack.
So the journey so far, Move current systems to the cloud with as little customer impact as possible.
And there was none. Wait, no, that's not
well, maybe
true.
just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a mail after all. But it's quite terrifying to a degree. It's quite a big thing can be reduced down to a single sentence. But that was our aim. And you've always got to aim high. But what did that mean for atmail and DreamHost? Well, for atmail, it meant we had to revisit our architecture, certainly both at a software layer and an infrastructure layer. And you gauge through this prism of security and performance and scalability, and we kind of had to go back. Remember, our software was certainly pre-cloud. It didn't, it was full stack was built on the concept of mail server on a box. So there was a few decisions there early on that just didn't play nicely with a cloud environment. So it was a case of okay, what could we recode? What do we need to work around? And from an infrastructure side of things, and how's the best place to put together? Now, of course, when you move to the cloud, you can just pick up your existing solution and just plow it as is into the cloud. Okay, it might save you some money. We wanted to go a little bit beyond that. We knew we weren't going to make it, utopia of cloud, but we certainly could progress down the path to make it much more cloud friendly and cloud ready. Automation. Well, I don't think anybody anywhere goes down the cloud path without looking at automation. If for no other reason, the amount of RSI you would get clicking on a mouse in the various UIs. And for us, that automation was Ansible. We'd been using it for months, powering the configuration of the bare metal servers. So it was a natural we carry on and see how we could use that. Now, at the time, we touched base with the Ansible's own OpenStack modules, and yeah, they weren't it was very, very, very early days for those.
Really early, yeah.
Very early, and they certainly weren't fit for purpose. So we certainly started our in-house Perl scripts to do that in the Ansible fashion. Because those that know Ansible, playbooks can be run time and time again, and it shouldn't impact a running system. So those scripts had to deal with the fact that if you want to create an instance and it's already existed, you didn't want to do anything more. It kind of interesting to note that in the last few months, we've actually refactored some of that work to use the OpenStack module. Now it's much more mature. So having tackled the automation part, obviously the next part was to use all that lot and to try and bring up a proof of concept and just test the hell out of it. Yep. And see whether it could do what we wanted it to do to the level we wanted to do with it, and maintain our service levels and what we found acceptable. I suppose this is where a few of the lessons came on both sides of the fence. But I think we got to the stage where both of us felt happy. Yeah. Which meant, obviously, the next job, migration, which I'll go back because I went too quickly. Migration. I'm not going to say a lot about migration. Mail migrations are, you can't do it completely without customer interaction. I mean, at the end of the day, your MX services are A records and they have to change. Yep. So.
And there was a whole lot of data flowing into a massive amount of storage for
a few terabytes.
Yeah, a few terabytes.
A few terabytes we had to port over. But, that was the easier part.
And for us, what that meant was, DreamHost has traditionally served smaller customers, and having this opportunity to work with atmail meant that we had to kind of create a new discipline around this kind of engagement. And we ended up doing a whole lot of collaboration with the engineering teams. So we actually had kind of shared IRC room that we hung out in. We had weekly catch-ups to kind of talk through architecture. What do we need to change here? As Matt kind of alluded to, things are a little bit different when you're working in an environment like built on OpenStack, and it depends on the choices you've made. So what type of networking is going on in the cloud? What kind of storage are you using? Are you using shared storage? What are its performance characteristics, right? We were using Ceph backed by SSDs, right? In the POC, we were actually using Ceph backed by spinning disks. Yeah. So, and as we went through these changes, we had to kind of test, and measure. So that close collaboration and kind of access to the engineers on both sides was a big part of that transition.
So I guess the next thing is, what do we learn? What do we find along the way, so to speak? On the we didn't really find anything that was hugely, which was really good.
Yeah.
niggly little items. So on the network layer, lots of networks, which work fine until they don't. And mostly when they don't is when your virtual router kind of blows up and has to rebuild. And it has so many networks, it just takes so long to try and converge all that information that it just times out and just falls in a heap and says, I don't want to do it anymore.
Troubleshooting these networks is also quite difficult from our perspective, right? When you have, 6 or 7, 8, 10 networks and data kind of going across all these different networks, you have instances that kind of sit on multiple networks, and you have to look at security groups, and it gets to be a bit of a nightmare. So DreamHost kindly obviously upped the time out for us initially, and then moved to distributed routing, which solved a few more of the issues along the way. Yeah. We had a use case where, in our old world, we were sharded with about 3 or 4 shards, I believe. So we wanted to make the load balancers out the front and make it more of a unified single presence, which for us kind of meant having a load balancer sitting out there with multiple IPs on the same network mapped to multiple public IPs. We tried doing that in a couple of ways. One, just having one interface per IP, which probably would have worked if we went down the policy-based routing, but a bit complicated that. Well, not complicated, but just adding another layer of complexity. Multiple IPs on the same network, though, that seemed to just work fine, so yay. Security groups, they're very secure. Sometimes they're exceedingly secure in the fact they don't actually allow traffic through. Most of the time, it's just a case of reapplying. Yep.
Not a problem. And we had some really weird, odd, bizarre routing issues. Some turned out to be bugs in Neutron itself, which DreamHost passed up the line and resolved and done. We're still seeing a couple of weird issues that we're trying to track down at the moment.
But again, it looks like a lot of this is one of the beauties of being a part of an open source project like OpenStack is when these things happen, usually you can find someone else that experiences it, and usually there's a patch, right? So we've definitely seen a lot of these things resolved, which has been great.
And then on the storage side, it's always networks and storage, isn't it? We use CentOS for our instances, and we find very occasionally that dev disk by ID, which is a symlink that's created when you kind of attach an instance, it doesn't always get created. Now for us, that symlink, it's kind of like virtio dash a nice hexadecimal number. That hexadecimal number happens to be a good portion of the front of the object ID that OpenStack assigns to volume. So here was a nice way for us to actually say, oh, look, that's that volume we revisioned, and this is where we want it. I don't know if it's the only way. If other people have got ways of doing that, let us know, because not a huge issue. You reboot the instance and it's there. But yeah, somewhat niggly if your auto-provisioning just flowers over, trying to find a volume that it doesn't know about. The smaller the cluster, the more likely to have pain when rebalancing, and that's either when you're growing the cluster or when one of the disks decide to go bye-bye and just drop out.
Yeah, this is partially because when we first went live with atmail, they were being moved kind of as the kind of anchor tenant in our new public cloud kind of next generation deployment. And this new pod started off smaller, right? And with Ceph, the more spindles you have, the better your performance is going to be. You want the cluster to be as big as possible. Well, not as big as possible, but you want it to get bigger. And so this started to become less and less of a problem as we grew the cluster and expanded and more customers were a part of it. But it's definitely was a concern.
Well, as I said, it's a bit of a no-brainer, because obviously the less disks you have, the more likely you're going to be on that disk that goes back. So yeah, so as it grows. And occasionally we still get a lock that somehow manages to, the operating system causes a hissy fit and sends the volume read-only, which is not so good. Well, mostly not so good in some instances, and one very occasional where it did blow up our Galera cluster because it just happened to affect all 5 nodes.
This turned out to be a Ceph bug, which thankfully was also fixed.
So what did we learn? What do we take out of that? Keep it simple. Kind of forget the traditional network topologies and VLANs. I came from a traditional kind of shop where, this service, bung a VLAN for that, and okay, that's another type of service, you have another VLAN for that. And to a degree, forget that in the cloud. Keep it simple. That's kind of what we started off with. multiple networks, multiple hosts attached to those networks.
It is pretty cool, though. That's a pretty cool,
pretty cool diagram.
and when you move your mouse over it goes nuts. Thank you, Horizon, for putting that in there.
So yeah, we're kind of going from that to something more simplified, where you've just got one, maybe two networks, and all your hosts on that one or two networks. What else was there? Review your architecture. Is it cloud ready, cloud friendly? I said we needed to change some stuff on ours because our software was obviously designed pre-cloud. It was some design decisions made at that time. It was just based around that. Dedicate sufficient resources is a bit of a no-brainer for any project, but it seems to come after every project as well. Test, and test again. Ensure you know your failure scenarios and what can go wrong. As the infamous saying goes, shit happens. And when it does, if you know how it's going to fail and recognize that, obviously the faster you are to respond and get it fixed up. For us, we went from a fairly simple architecture in bare metal to one behind load balancers and multiple nodes behind load balancers. And suddenly we had, we got an intermittent problem on a 5-node cluster. It's like, it only happens so often, but it's one of 5. Much more complicated. And last but not least, try and find the right provider and partner for you. We were lucky to find DreamHost, I think. The direct access to the engineers.
Hold your applause.
Was a big plus because it did avoid the scenarios where you kind of put your hand up and say, look, we think we've got a problem. And your provider kind of just went, well, nobody else is having a problem, and all our monitoring is green, so it must be yours. Well,
right.
So it kind of avoided all that kind of bun fight where you kind of had to go back and kind of prove, no, it's not our problem. There is something wrong somewhere along the lines.
Definitely.
So where to now? Good question. In terms of OpenStack, there are obviously a number of projects that are going to prove interesting. I think top of the lot would be CephFS and Manila.
Absolutely.
For us, a shared file system that can be mounted on multiple nodes solves a big problem that we've got at the moment. So we're looking very keenly at that, see if it's going to be performant enough for our needs. Octave and its load balancing as a service, again, potentially the more that we can push off into services and concentrate on more of our core product and more of everything, the better. Manaska and its monitoring, that could be very helpful to us as well. We run a whole myriad of Monet and Neem and Thruck and a couple of other things to do our alerting and monitoring. But it'd be nice if we had something kind of like below at the system level, not having to run in the tenancy itself. Maybe have more of a broader picture of the whole platform as a whole, rather than just add a little piece. I suppose VPNs and heats, they're probably less interested at the moment, mainly due to resource contention and stuff to do. If you try, it's probably more a thing for you guys.
Indeed, and actually that, I think, kind of segs a little bit into what's useful to us about this. As a provider, it's really difficult to know which of these services should we deploy. OpenStack provides so many options for both customers and for deployers to kind of decide, should I be offering Manila to my customers? Do they want it? Octavia, do they want it? And it's nice having a customer relationship with a partner where you can actually do things like build out POCs, give it a shot, see how it works in a real use case, and learn this together. And the beauty of that means, okay, if our customer wants it and we're able to provide it and it creates real value, that value means that we could charge customers for this. This is a reason for us to deploy something. So that's a unique part about this kind of relationship that I think has been really helpful. And OpenStack's kind of microservice, or independent service nature. You don't have one big monolithic thing. You can kind of pick and choose what you want to deploy, and there's usually plugins for implementation on all these different services as well. So with Manila, it doesn't have to be on Ceph. It could be something else. But it's nice. It gives us the opportunity to validate and verify that this is a useful thing that our customers will actually want.
In terms of us as a company, obviously, we continue our SaaS journey. As I said, we built out our EU instance. We plan to grow that hopefully this year. We're looking to develop an APAC regional cloud, so we'll be on the hunt for a partner that has a data center over in that. And utilization of object storage, that's, we think that's going to be a big area over the next couple of years and could disrupt the current kind of NFS shared storage market that currently goes on at the moment. So kind of watch that space. I think that's going to be certainly a push to do that.
And I think one of the things that's also interesting for us is right now we provide a general purpose cloud that atmail has to kind of come in and massage and shape their product to kind of fit in that infrastructure, in that cloud. And we're actually looking at providing a little bit more of a tailored experience for customers like atmail, building out clouds that are not general purpose, that are for a specific purpose, right? And again, having a customer that you can validate with and find out, okay, this is a real use case, this is something we can sell. It's a really nice thing to have, so.
So that about concludes it up, and if there are any questions.
You're all running it as containers like this?
Not containers yet. We're basically on VM instances at the moment. Oh, sorry, the question was, sorry, because the first.
Is it all running on containers?
Is it running on containers? And no, we're not running containers just yet.
Funnily enough, we were just talking about that before.
We were just talking about as to come in. For the application side, it kind of makes a lot of sense for I think, the container path, and that's a path we'll probably look to go down. Very different for the actual email MTAs itself, because obviously you've got that state there of the spool file, and you can't just suddenly blow up a container and forget about it. People might get a bit upset if you're trying to deliver mail and it suddenly goes missing.
Just email, no big deal.
Yeah. So yeah, I think containers are appropriate for some things, and certainly we'll be looking at that. But I think some other things will obviously be still in the VM side of things. Any other questions at all?
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed.